All right, welcome back everybody, and thank you so much for joining us to watch the 30th anniversary screening of Takeover, a movie that documents the first nationally coordinated housing takeover run and led by homeless members of the National Union of the Homeless. Again, my name is Kristen Coangelo, and I was honored to be part of the original union and now the re-established National Union of the Homeless. I'm the membership director, national secretary, and also one of the organizers, and I'm very honored to be here. I want to introduce our panel and then turn it over to them. They will each be speaking, and then we'll open it up for question and answer. Please continue to put your questions in whatever format you're in so that we can get them. Our first speaker is Peter Kinoy. I'm very excited to have Peter here tonight. He is the co-founder of Skylight Pictures that created this movie and worked very closely with the National Union of the Homeless. Peter was also a member of the original New York Homeless Union and works closely today with the National Union of the Homeless in New York as well. Our second speaker is Anthony Prince. He is our lead organizer and general counsel of the National Union of the Homeless and also the general counsel of the California Union of the Homeless. In the original National Union of the Homeless, Tony was a member of the Chicago-Gary Homeless Union. Our third speaker is Alicia Kuhl from California. She is the president of the Santa Cruz Homeless Union and has worked really closely with striking student movement that's been coming out of that area. So I'm very happy to have all of them with us tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Peter.
Hey, Kristen, can you hear me or see me?
I can hear you, Peter, but my video is not working either. So I can definitely hear you loud and clear. So you can go ahead with your turn.
All right. Well, I hope other people can see me. I don't know. So it was quite emotional for me to see the film now. I mean, it's been a while. We made this film back in 1990. I made it with my partner Pamela Yates, and we made it with incredible volunteer camera people all over the United States who just threw down and started working with us to make this movie possible. It's been 30 years, and I've been in this struggle now for 30 years. I don't know if we got a little technical problem here. I'm seeing some chat that you can't see me. Anyway, I'll go on talk.
Now there's something wrong with the video, but we can hear you loud and clear. You sound great, so you can continue.
Okay, thank you. So it's been 30 years. And I've never stopped trying to figure out how is it possible to use this incredibly powerful medium in order to put across our message. And what is our message? Well, today I work with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And I work in New York State, and I'm part of the media team in New York State. And one of the things that we keep saying now is that in order to change the narrative, you have to change the narrator. And what does that mean? Well, if we look back at what was going on in the mid-'80s up into the '90s, and still to today, there's a narrative that the ruling class puts out about homelessness. And they tell us that people are homeless because it's their own fault. They've made the wrong choices in life. They're drug addicts, they're drunkards. They can't hold a job. Well, you can't change that narrative until you change the narrator. And what does that mean? It means that, and this is what I learned, this is the very important lesson that I learned working with the Homeless Union. You can't change that narrative until homeless people can speak for themselves. And so this was really a turning point in my education. The other thing that I learned from the Homeless Union is their slogan: we will only get what we're organized to take. Now, what does that really mean in terms of what we're trying to do? It means that we have to be organized. And what the Homeless Union was saying is that the poor are going to organize themselves. The poor are going to organize the poor. And this is what you can see going on in that film. And if you watch Takeover, you see who is speaking for the homeless. Are there any experts in that film speaking for the homeless? No. The people who are most affected by the situation are speaking for themselves. So I guess it was 2 years ago, the National Poor People's Campaign held a big meeting in Washington, D.C. And there, a small group of us got together, and it was decided to reestablish the Union of the Homeless. And it's my incredible privilege to remain, after 30 years, working with this effort to change the narrative, to say there's plenty of houses. We've seen there's plenty of money. Look what they did with this bailout. Plenty of money for the corporations. So we have to work on changing the narrative. And this is what we do as filmmakers within a movement. I won't take any more time now, Kristen, and I'll throw it back to you, but thank you very much.
Awesome, Peter. Thank you so much. That's Peter Kinoy. Again, Skylight Pictures made a series of movies that came out of the anti-poverty organizing at this time, and we can definitely get more information out for folks. Thank you so much, Peter. I just want to remind folks that we are having a little Zoom issue, and our cameras right now are not turning on, but we are here and we're excited and we're going to keep going forward. That's what we do. We just organize through it. I would like to take this moment to introduce Anthony Prince. Anthony Prince is our lead organizer and has been doing this work since I believe he was 15 years old. It is a great honor to call him my mentor, but also to call him my friend. And I would like to turn it over to Anthony Prince at this time.
Okay, Kristen, I know you guys can't see me. Consider yourselves lucky, I would say, on that score. But can you guys hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, all right then. Well, first of all, it's a real pleasure to be part of this presentation tonight. Of course, Takeover is, it chronicles such an important turning point, I think, in the development of our movement. And Peter and Pamela Yates and all the people that worked on the film, one cannot say enough about this weapon that they have forged. And we're in a period now where we're dusting off our weapons and sharpening our swords, as one of our local homeless union leaders recently put it. And Takeover is, of course, right there, a essential part of our arsenal in changing public opinion, in trying to draw on the lessons of what we did 30, 35 years ago, and in pointing the way forward. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about, first of all, some of what I would consider some of the important lessons, some of which are visible on the screen, visible in the movie. One of them, I think Peter made the point, but it's the single most important point, and that is that we're homeless, not helpless. That's the leading key emblematic slogan of what we did 30 years ago and remains occupying that same central position today. Homeless, not helpless. Because those three words effectively challenge the narrative that the ruling class puts out there, that the homeless are to be either pitied or scorned, vilified, or categorized into a subpopulation, increasingly a subhuman population that has to be dealt with. That is, you always see in the media and the newspapers, you see the word homeless, and then you see the word problem right after the word homeless, the homeless problem. And so by saying homeless, not helpless, we pushed back and continue to push back against this stereotypical viewpoint that the most distressed and dispossessed, this most completely lacking in just about anything, when you've been pushed to the level of being on the street, you represent a force that has nowhere to go but up. And I think that the whole point that we're trying to make here is that we formed the Homeless Union not because we felt sorry for the homeless, not because it was the most destitute segment of the working class, but because we appreciated 30 years ago, recognize, I think, the significance of this particular section of the population. You know, if you study history, at any given point, there's a segment, there's a link in that chain that pulls the whole chain forward, because that segment of the population occupies objectively a certain position such that it can pull that whole chain forward if it gets an appreciation and an understanding of the position it occupies. It has to have an awareness of the position that it occupies. You can go back in history, the runaway slave, the fugitive slave. At one point, the women, you know, at the turn of the century, as the women increasingly came into the leadership, at the industrial worker at a certain point in the development of the struggle for justice and the economy of the United States occupied a leading position. In the 60s, the battles in the South, you know. And today we are absolutely convinced that this increasingly expanding segment of the population, the most visibly dispossessed, the most visible expression of a broader poverty, really is a key element, a key link in moving the whole process forward. So our union is a political union. It is a union that is about not just making things a little bit better for the homeless, even though we fight tooth and nail, and we're fighting right now in the streets and in the courts for every possible relief measure that we can win from these guys, and more importantly, every relief measure that we can directly provide ourselves to the homeless community, especially during this pandemic. So I think the lesson that Peter touched on, and you saw right there, is that poor people, working class people, homeless people are fully capable of organizing their own movement. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a movement or a union only of homeless or only of poor people. We reject that proposition as well, because again, we push back against the isolation of the homeless. This whole concept that it's about homeless, 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 and if you're not talking about homeless, and if you're not homeless, then you have no part to play in the movement and in the union movement that we're building. That is not our position. And so we welcome into the Homeless Union as we move to reestablish and grow, and we're growing, I think, significantly, especially during this pandemic. But as we go forward, we're both mindful of the composition of our union, its officer corps, its membership has got to be and is overwhelmingly poor, working class, people that are challenged as far as housing insecurity and homeless. But at the same time, we welcome into the union and we encourage into the union at all levels those who appreciate the significance of this fight, no matter what segment of society they're coming into. Because if we can't do that, then we will have failed to break out, to move this struggle out of its isolation. And no matter how broad or how intense a struggle is, and no matter how many people are involved in a struggle, if it's isolated away from the general struggle, it cannot succeed. So what we're doing now, I think, is learning those lessons, particularly my experience, as Kristen pointed out. I was living in Chicago, in my family's old neighborhood in South Chicago, working and then being laid off from U.S. Steel at the Southworks. At the same time that the homeless union movement was being developed, and the union was being developed in Philadelphia, New York, in Minneapolis, and in Chicago, the movement and the union got underway quickly. And actually, 3 years before the coordinated takeovers you saw in the film, we were already going into vacant units of public housing and taking the boards off, snapping the locks, moving homeless people back into the projects, for the most part, public housing projects that they had cleared out. And we were able to bring in the industrial workers. I brought, myself at that time was an officer with the Steelworkers Local 65 in South Chicago. We were able to get the unemployed and laid off steelworkers from Gary, Indiana at the U.S. Steel, the giant plant there that they had. You had thousands of people who never would have thought that they would be walking around with food stamps, never thought that they would be in danger of losing their homes and their cars and everything that they own. And there they were, cast into the ranks of the unemployed. And so we were kind of a prototype and kind of ahead of our time when we showed that this was really a class battle, you know, that everyone was in a precarious position. And that is so obvious today that it's beyond dispute, you know, and I think this pandemic has shown just how close everyone is to the breadline and to the homeless streets. So we're moving forward now. We're you know, focused on doing two things, and that is having a real core of leaders, because one of the lessons of the old union was that we had made significant efforts. We had an education department. We had schools. We had one significant 6-week training session, I think it was, at the outset, but we were never able to really consolidate a durable, ongoing educational process. And that was a real issue for us, because if you don't have leaders that understand the whole line of march, you cannot sustain the movement, and we were unable to sustain the union, in part because of that. The other thing we're trying to do, though, at the same time, is we need that leadership core and study and learn about what is homelessness, how is it systemically derived. At the same time, we do need to be mindful, we think, of our ability to actually impose our will, to actually become a real significant material force in changing things in this country, the quantitative aspect and the qualitative aspect. And so I think that we're at a juncture right now where we have an obligation and an opportunity to do something that we were unable to do in the past. And that opportunity was coming our way even before this pandemic hit. But with the pandemic, I think that we're talking about what W.E.B. Du Bois used to talk about, the moments in history. He talked about the missed moments. We can't let this one be a missed moment. So I'm going to kind of stop there. Let me just say, though, is my time up? I was going to have 30 more seconds, but I'll wait.
Awesome. We're going to open back up as soon as the intros are done. Thank you. That was very powerful and clear, and we so appreciate you. Alicia, I'm going to turn it over to you. Alicia is the president of one of our California homeless unions in Santa Cruz, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
All right. I hope you all can hear me.
Perfectly.
My name's Alicia, and I'm the president of the Santa Cruz chapter of the California Homeless Union. And I came upon the scene, I want to say about 2 years ago. I myself am homeless. I lost my place due to my landlord. He was renting units he shouldn't have been renting. It's kind of a tragic story that mirrors what happens to a lot of people. He stole my deposit, and ultimately, I now live in an RV with my family of 5. I have 3 small children. I noticed immediately how people who are homeless are profiled and how they're treated in Santa Cruz and just in general. At the same time that I became homeless, there was a large homeless encampment here in Santa Cruz behind the Ross Dress for Less building that was growing. At the time, it had about 200 people and growing, and it had been there for about 6 months. I came to find out that my best friend Desiree was living there as well, And so I started following what was happening at that camp, and I started going to city council meetings. I was noticing that there was a lot of talk about the camp. There were no services being brought to the camp, no garbage disposal services, nothing like that. So the city basically allowed, you know, what grew to be over 200 people, about 250 people, to live for 6 months with no garbage service. And then they're holding city council meetings talking about what a nuisance that this camp was, and what are they going to do with all these people, and how they didn't have anybody within the camp that was talking to them, no contacts, nothing like that. So I went into the camp and I helped form what we called the Ross Camp Council. And so it hits home to me when you say homeless and poor people organizing and speaking up for themselves and representing themselves, because that's kind of very much what happened in this situation. I went into the camp, we formed the Ross Camp Council, we started speaking up for ourselves. We were then recognized by the city. They recognized me as the liaison to the Ross Camp, and we started holding meetings. Ultimately, the city displaced this encampment, and those same people are pretty much our regular homeless people here in Santa Cruz. They're all over town. It was a violation of Martin versus Boise, and so Anthony, actually, this is how we met Anthony and joined the union. He held a workshop about how to start a pro se lawsuit. And I paid really close attention to that workshop. And to try to stop the city from displacing the residents of the Ross camp, we filed a temporary restraining order. It was successful for a short amount of time. And then ultimately the city lied about what they were going to provide those residents. And so they were able to get the restraining order lifted. And ultimately that case was dismissed. But in terms of the narrative, changing the narrative, it became very obvious to everyone in our community that the city did lie. And so about 6 months later, we retook the area of the Ross camp and formed Camp Phoenix. We were successful for about 5 days, basically shaming the city to show them, look, all these people were not offered shelter, and here we are again. And we've basically been documenting the harm that has come to everyone since they've been displaced. Everything that the city has done in terms of not supporting and all of their, I don't really know how to say some of this. Basically, they're lying about everything. I've been working with Food Not Bombs. We helped place, when COVID-19 happened, we helped place over 200 people into hotel rooms. And the city has not done that. The city has taken to providing congregate settings instead of the guidelines of the CDC and the governor. And so that's the biggest issue that we're currently dealing with. I was with the committee last June. I think it was June. I'm getting my dates all mixed up because of this quarantine and everything, to reestablish the National Union of the Homeless. And so I'm very much pleased to be a part of this. I believe that organization is the key. That is what we're doing here in Santa Cruz. We're organizing and we're documenting. And because of the actions of the city and the failures and the negligence, we're actually getting ready to file another lawsuit. And so I'm sure there's a lot of questions, and Anthony can maybe take it from there. I'm not exactly the best speaker, but that's what I have to say about that. Thank you.
Alicia, you're amazing, and we love you. And the work that you're doing in California is powerful. So thank you so much. I want to thank all the panelists and their introductions. We'll have a lot more information that we can get weaved in through the answering of these questions. The way that I'm going to moderate this is I'm taking the questions from all formats, and some have themes. So I'll be pulling themes, and many questions can be answered in one question. And then there's some very specific questions. I'm going to direct it to one or two panelists, but please understand that any panelist can jump in on these questions, Anthony, Peter, and Alicia. The first question that I'm going to give to Anthony is, can you just talk a little bit about the connection between the National Union of the Homeless and the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival?
Sure, Kristen. Well, as most people know, we are a part of the Poor People's Campaign. We are a national partner of the Poor People's Campaign at the national level. And at the local level, in just about every state where the Poor People's Campaign has been active for the last few years, where we have homeless union locals and where we have locals in formation, we lift up the message of fusion. We lift up that message of combating these interconnected evils of the system. We are very much supportive of what the Poor People's Campaign is trying to accomplish at this time. And I would encourage everyone to go online and see if you can find just this beautiful article that Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, who's one of the national co-chairs, recently Liz wrote this article in The Nation news magazine on the re-emergence, the significance of the re-emergence of the National Union of the Homeless. Liz was a teenager when I first met her in Philadelphia, and she goes back to the work we did that she was very much a part of, and she carries that element into the Poor People's Campaign. And so we are chemically enmeshed and very, very happy to be a part of that campaign. So I don't know what more I can say. They've been very supportive of us because I think they appreciate the importance of poor people organizing themselves, not just as telling the stories, the plight, but also the fight and the insight. So yeah, we're very close.
Thank you so much, Anthony. The next question has to do with our partnership with Food Not Bombs and Keith McHenry, and the role of Food Not Bombs previously and currently in the movement and the movie, and the intersectionality between food insecurity and housing insecurity. I'm going to turn that over to either Anthony or Alicia. Alicia works very closely. I believe her co-president is Keith Henry, but I'm going to open it up to either one of you that want to take that.
You go first, Alicia.
Okay, well, Food Not Bombs has been feeding people globally. They have chapters all over the globe. And the idea is basically feeding the most vulnerable people. Keith has a motto that he doesn't turn away anybody. And as we all know, food insecurity just goes hand in hand with homelessness. Homeless people have a hard time accessing food, especially safe, healthy food. And Keith, Food Not Bombs provides vegan meals, and he provides healthy, hot, like a 8-course vegan meal. And he's inspired people to do that all around the globe. And it just goes hand in hand with the homeless union here, because he's the one that feeds us. And so we just work very closely together, providing services, and not just food, but other supplies. He's the one that helped with the motel distribution to our most vulnerable. So it's not just food, but it's a lot. And I'm sure Anthony can elaborate a little bit more. But I love Keith, and Food Not Bombs is amazing.
Thank you so much.
Well, I'll just add a little bit. You guys actually got to see Keith there in Takeover. He was part of that confrontation with the city of Oakland, and you saw that big fella being wrestled to the ground by the security guards over there at Oakland City Hall. That was Keith. Keith has been with us. He was actually with us in the original homeless union. He was feeding and supporting the Boston Homeless Union with Savina Martin and James Scherer and our leadership out there. And to this day continues to lift up and support the union. We're working very closely together. And I want to say that just in a couple of days, May 24th, 2020 is the 40th anniversary of Food Not Bombs. We're actually going to have a webinar celebrating a Memorial Day webinar touching on the issue of veterans, homelessness, and hunger. And it's a joint webinar of our homeless union and Food Not Bombs. So Keith is just a national treasure. He's writing his memoir now. I can't wait to see it. But Keith reports that there are thousands of people coming into the lines at Food Not Bombs across the world. The crisis has greatly elevated the profile of Food Not Bombs. So we thank God and we thank Keith McHenry for it.
And Kristen, this is
Yes.
Peter, and
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one thing about
Absolutely.
the Food Not Bombs. During the 1990s, as we got very involved with following poor people organizing at that time, groups began raising a slogan called Projects of Survival. And at first when I heard this, I thought, what is that? What's a project of survival? But what I came to understand, it's today people are talking about mutual aid. And projects of survival are when people in need get together and figure out ways of getting what they need. So just last week, we began documenting a Food Not Bombs project in Albany, New York, that is very, very active at this point, has remained active. I mean, all of these places have been active because the crisis of poverty has been there, and it's just been accelerated and made so much more visible with the devastation of the COVID-19. And, this idea of projects of survival, I think, is important because, again, it's saying that we have the ability to organize ourselves.
Thank you so much. You actually, Peter, brought me in, excuse me, to my next question. The history of a project of survival comes out of the Black Panther movement and how they became the biggest threat in the United States. And that was because they were doing things that we call mutual aid, but they were weaponizing it. And they were weaponizing it through that they were using these needs and meeting these basic needs in the community and highlighting, one, that nobody else was helping them, and two, developing, politicizing, weaponizing leadership in those communities. And projects of survival are central to what we're doing. And I'm gonna ask a kind of a three-part question, so bear with me. The National Union of the Homeless lessons have informed organizing in the past 30 years. And one of the things that has come out of that is something called the 6 Panther Ps and the poor organizing the poor model. And questions are coming in about, the first is, we just talked about projects of survival. And one of the questions is that nonprofits and other organizations are consistently saying that those that are in the deep struggle, those that are on the front lines of the struggle, can't organize themselves, ignoring the connection between organizing and projects of survival. And if one of you could talk, or all of you could talk about the central importance of projects of survival in the National Union of the Homeless experience. I also want to ask some questions about some of the other Ps, but this projects of survival is one of the first and central questions. So I'm going to turn it over to whoever would like to take that first. We all do it.
Well, I'll take a first stab at it. I would respond to the the question of project survival and the kind of make a comparison with what we call the homeless industrial complex, which is a very broad kind of institution that runs the gamut, I think, of well-meaning people and organizations and 501c3s and charitable institutions, but that it has essentially kind of been framed, and I think generally speaking, the perspective of that segment of the societal effort to address homelessness is one of charity and of disempowerment of poor and homeless people. That poor and homeless people cannot fend for themselves, cannot figure things out, and cannot make a struggle for their survival. The fact of the matter is that it's happening before our eyes, and the homeless, we're not the only ones doing it. There's Project Survival being rolled out by poor people, homeless people, organizers all across this country. We're only a small part of a broad self-survival movement underway by poor people right now. In Sacramento, as Sacramento County did nothing, as Sacramento, the city of Sacramento stood by and watched as 11,000 homeless people fell prey to the COVID-19 pandemic, we stepped in. Crystal Sanchez, our leadership in Sacramento, immediately went into action, and we have deployed hundreds of washing stations. We formed a medical team of 30 medical students from UC Santa Cruz and California North State Medical School into the camps, into the streets, doing what the system failed to do. And as you say, Kristen, by way of that action, making that political statement that with all its resources, the system failed. So we step in to provide those necessary services and to expose the failure of that system. So I think that the Project Survival is what we're talking about. We're moving into the winter offensive, which was something we'll talk more about, because I hope that this discussion tonight is the first of many, many serious discussions and planning opportunities. But the winter offensives that we had with the original union, we're going to be looking at that again, but we want to include as many genuine organizations and grassroots fighters as we can, because we know what's going to happen as we move into the winter months. We know that we're going to see the kind of death in the streets on an unprecedented level, and we're determined to push back and see to it that we do everything we can to organize for the survival of the community.
Thank you so much. I have some more questions around the Panther Peas, but does anyone want to talk about this one or add to what Anthony said?
Just to echo what Anthony said, that's what we're doing here in Santa Cruz. Is we're basically documenting, like I said, all the failures, and we're taking care of the needs of the community ourselves through organization and through donations. And with Food Not Bombs, we've been taking care of the needs of the most vulnerable. It has not been the city and the county.
Thank you. So the next piece of this organizing model that we use, where everything that we do is to build our power. You only get what you're organized to take. So everything that we're doing and our organizing model speaks to building our base, panning for gold in everything that we do, identifying leaders and developing them to then go out and develop other leaders. That's what a leader does. It learns, it analyzes, a leader studies, and then they go out and they develop other leaders. So our whole Poor Organizing the Poor model revolves around this belief and practice and proven tactic. The next piece is, and Peter, part of it is directly toward you, and then the others on the phone is, first, how is press and communication used first originally in the National Union of Homeless, and how do we use that now? And as we all know, we have to recapture the narrative about why people are suffering in this country. 140 poor and low wage people in this country that can't survive a $400 emergency. They're controlling the narrative. So how are we using press, projects of survival, protests to recapture this narrative and take it back?
Thanks, Kristen. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, because we saw early on that the mainstream press was going to distort or ignore what we were doing. Particularly, it was going to ignore any efforts at organized resistance. It was going to absolutely ignore what Anthony was talking about, the power of people not being helpless. So on the other hand, you have to get your message out. So how do you do that? Well, we saw early on that there was a role for a people's media, for media that was not outside looking at the phenomena of people or of poor people organizing, but was working with the people who were organizing And for instance, in 1989, a year before the takeovers that you saw in the movie, we were asked to document a survival summit in Philadelphia. And we made a little DVD out of that called Street Heat. And, 30 or 40 copies of that DVD were then distributed to the organizations who were there at that survival summit. We didn't think much more of it, but when we went to make Takeover, and in the various cities, now you have to remember this was before cell phones, everything had to be done by telephone. It's kind of like going back to this Zoom meeting here, all audio. We were getting very disturbing reports back from the volunteer camera people in the other cities. And they were saying, the homeless people here, they don't trust us. They think we're the media. And we thought, what can we do? How can we help, break that misunderstanding? And then we said, well, we're the people that made Street Heat. And it turned out that that small little video, Street Heat, had been used and was being used to train the people in the takeover movement. And when they understood that we were the ones who made that video, they understood we were not the media, that we were part of that movement. And that opened up the doors for all of our teams to go and be able to be in the inside, filming with the various groups as they planned and took over the houses. So early on, we began realizing we've got to have our own media. Now, of course, we keep trying, and you look for allies wherever you can, and you look for allies within the mass media. The problem is that the mass media is very, very controlled as a corporate messenger, and we really cannot trust it. So if we're going to get the message out that it is possible for change to develop from the bottom, that it is possible for people to organize for their own necessities, and then that it might be possible to vision and envision a different way of organizing society than what currently exists. So these are the things that we're now training people within the Poor People's Campaign to do, to be able to use media for themselves, to tell an effective story, and to be able to envision for other people what a future could look like.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was awesome, powerful. And I want to tie this all together and pose the next question to Anthony. And it's about the use of political education. As we always say, it isn't on the agenda, it is the agenda. But if you could talk a little bit about what that means and why do we say that, and how political education is threaded through everything that we do, and what is political education? Why do we use that term? And just go into that would be awesome. Thank you.
Well, I think I would say this. First of all, that political education is the ability to understand where we're going and how we're going to get there. It's analyzing. It's learning to analyze each step in a process to understand the context within which we're fighting. You know what I'm saying? That if you just see the immediate issue in front of you, if you see no more than what's directly in your line of sight, and you fail to see what's behind the city council, what's behind the police, what's behind the developers. If you see these things in a fragmented manner, you're at a disadvantage because our adversaries operate systemically, and we're up against a system. It's in our mission statement. Our mission statement calls for the end of homelessness. That can only be done by the fundamental reconstruction of society. So political education is not just, oh, we think we'll do something in the future. It's how do we get to that future? And I think that it has to be a combination of serious study. We just had our first officers training school in September of last year. We hope to replicate that officers training where we did some intense study, a lot of reading, a lot of discussion, a lot of excellent presentations. But I think the other part of political education is what we experience when we're out there fighting. As we summarize our progress, summarize everything we do, where we frankly and objectively analyze what happened here, why were we unable to hold on to this encampment? What forces were we arrayed against? There's a question that has been, I see on the question and answer from one of our people, one of our fighters down in Los Angeles, a whole series of very important questions about how do we bridge the gap between housed and unhoused? How do we address the issue of vacant rooms when there's so many people who need those rooms? How do we break down divisions between the housed and the unhoused? These are excellent questions. They cannot be answered tonight in just one panel, but they're the right questions. And those questions are what political education has to address. We're not sitting in an armchair and trying to be, look at this thing in some academic perspective. We're fighters, and we're not sitting around waiting, and then with the expectation that we can write a treatise on this 5 years from now, though that's important too. We have to have that political education as a dynamic process. And that's how we're looking at it. We're learning a lot, but you don't just learn by doing something. You have to look at what you've done, analyze it, have a frank discussion about it, distill the lessons, apply them to the next round of battles. That to me is what political education is all about. And we have a lot of teachers. We're both students and teachers, every one of us. Every one of us has something to contribute as far as illuminating the battlefield that we're on.
Thank you so much, Anthony. There were a couple of quick questions that came in that I'm just going to answer, and then I want to turn it over to a question about organizing tactics and methods that I believe you can all answer. One of the questions was, how does the National Union of the Homeless get its funding? We are fully funded through donations of supporters and members and leaders. Our biggest resource, though, is not money, it's us. It's our power, it's our organization, it's our base. And it's the people that are joining the union and joining this fight every day. But the quick answer is that we are fully funded through donations, and we've given the GoFundMe page link to Free Speech TV, and hopefully that will go out to everybody, but we have no formal funding that comes into the National Union of the Homeless today. Another question was the estimate number of unhoused people today. Depending on where you read, it's between 8 and 11 million, 1.5 million school-aged children. And out of California came the slogan, how do you do homework when you have no home? And now we have, how do you stay at home if you have no home? Very powerful slogans. And then the next question was, with the vacant units in the United States right now, could we house people? How many people could we house? And that also depends on your source of media, but it is between 12 and 16 units available today for every person that is unhoused. And that's a staggering number. Like I said, it depends on where you look and what the sources are. Some say 6, some say as high as 16, but it's pretty damn high for anybody to be living on the street. This is a change in our priorities, a change in our the way that we care for people, our social welfare. But again, to return to our slogan, you only get what you're organized to take, and we need to take this stuff back. So those were just some quick questions. And then I want to turn it over to, if you could all talk about how the day-to-day tactics and methods have changed over time, especially when we're facing, again, a chemical warfare and other things that are leading to this huge increase in homelessness and homeless school-age children. So I want to turn that over, the change in day-to-day tactics and methods. Thank you.
Is that for any of us?
Yeah, whoever wants to go first, please.
So I guess what you're asking, or what the question is what, from a tactical standpoint, what remains the same, what's changed? Is that pretty much the question?
How have the day-to-day tactics and methods of organizing changed over time?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Especially in the face of our increased chemical warfare and other attacks on us.
Well, I'll just make a couple of quick observations. One, I think that we have some challenges that remain the same as we faced when we had the original union, and I would say what we call chemical warfare is one of them. We especially in the bigger cities where we formed the union, in many cases that union was formed in the crucible of the fight for treatment on demand, in the crucible of the fight against the import, because this stuff came in from the outside, and we know why. It came in to disarm and to break up and to essentially pulverize this growing movement of poor and homeless and working class people. This chemical warfare. The lead in that fight was taken by Savina Martin and our Boston homeless union people. And that calls for an entire separate discussion, which I hope we can put on because it's such a critical question. So I would say that stays with us. And the lessons of what happened in the treatment on demand struggles in Boston we need to examine. Today, we find ourselves once again in the victims of a chemical war. Our union is trying to analyze this situation so that we attack it and appreciate its complexity. But there's no question in our mind. And my good friend Willie Baptist likes to say that you can't stagger your way to freedom. And so we're building a serious movement. And we understand that the ruling class has put this poison, not just into the homeless. I mean, this drug thing, the thing that I think is clear to everyone now is that every restive, unemployed, dispossessed section of the working class and even sections of the middle class are being pulverized and paralyzed by this chemical warfare, the opioids and the rest of it, the pharmaceutical industries. This being sued. This is common knowledge, but it has a political significance. So that's something we wrestle with on a much more intense level. And the only other thing, the thing I would say is also a new challenge for us, which we really didn't have, I think, at the level we have today, is this homeless industrial complex. Because one of the, I think, things we have to look at that has been created over the last 30 years, because like I say, nature abhors a vacuum. And when we formed the National Union and we were able to sustain the union for a considerable period of time, have this large membership and chapters and struggles, but we were unable to sustain the union. And we have a brief history of the National Union of the Homeless. And we are undertaking a frank and serious examination of what we did right, what were our real successes, and what was it that accounted for the fact we couldn't sustain the union ultimately. And I think into that vacuum walked this homeless industrial complex. And we have to deal with it today on a much more exaggerated and expanded level than we had to deal with it in the past. I think, Savina and Willie and some of the others in our leadership and you also, Kristen and Tani Allgood, those of us who were in the beginning can weigh in with their view. But in my view, this is something we have to contend with, because they're there in large part, I think, to prevent the kind of movement we're trying to build, one of actually not just for advocating on behalf of, but actually organizing for homeless people. I would say that that's a tactical and even a strategic issue that faces us now on a whole new level that we're going to have to contend with.
Thank you. Alicia or Peter, do you have anything to add to that about the tactics and methods and how they've changed over time?
So the only thing that I would add, I don't think that our tactics have really changed, but I would definitely say that our work is increasing by the day and the intensity of it is increasing. We're getting more and more phone calls. More and more people are, desperate for help, desperate for services. The line for Food Not Bombs is ever increasing. We have started providing more and more services. We're out there longer hours, more days. It's 7 days a week now when it used to be 2. And so that's what's currently happening.
Thank you. Peter?
Well, certainly in terms of our being able to put out a different narrative, I think things have changed a great deal. They haven't changed a great deal in terms of what makes a compelling story and a compelling narrative that people can seize and make their own. I think that's kind of universal and it stays the same. But the means of capturing that story and putting it back out there have just changed revolutionary from the time we made Takeover. I mean, when we made Takeover, we were lucky if, there were 100 DVD copies of it, and then eventually, or actually at first VHS copies, and then eventually DVD copies of it out there. There was, now every single person with a cell phone has the potential of creating a compelling visual story. And this ability is something that we must continue to work on. But the thing is, these stories have to be informed by what Anthony is talking about. They have to be informed by the political education, by the combination of the struggle in the street and the reflection on that of where we've come from and where we're trying to get to. So it's the combination. We've revolutionized the technology. Now what we need to do is revolutionize our understanding of our own situations within the society. And once we can put those two things together, then I think will be a very powerful force. And that's how I think really it's changed over the years.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank all of you. We did have a follow-up question to the power of the choice of the connection between the National Union of the Homeless and the Poor People's Campaign. And Anthony, as a tri-chair and part of the National Steering Committee, I'd like to turn that one over to you.
Well, thanks, Kristen. And so again, I guess the questions was raised about another aspect of the union and our relationship with the Poor People's Campaign. And so what I want to clarify is that the Poor People's Campaign is a campaign. It has a structure in order to facilitate the campaign, but as Reverend Barber, Reverend Liz constantly point out, it's an organism, not an organization. And so and I'm actually one of the California co-chairs here for the Poor People's Campaign. And so I think it's important to recognize that the difference between what we're doing, I speak for the Homeless Union, we are very much an organization. We're a union, and we adopt certain structures of the traditional trade union, industrial unions, but of course we're a political union. We represent something very different than the narrow kind of task of the older and more traditional trade and craft unions. But there's no question in my mind that the Poor People's Campaign is I would say the most significant development in the opportunity to unify this country, not just poor people, not just working people, but every decent thinking person in this country around can we come together? Can we agree on the main things? We can disagree on everything else, but can we agree on the main thing? And I think that where an organization, how it's organized, or how the campaign is structured, or how it's funded, or who supports it or who doesn't, these are things I think that are secondary to what is being accomplished here. And I thank God for the Poor People's Campaign. I've been with the Poor People's Campaign arguably for 30 years. We all have. The National Union, the union work, the struggles in the camps, the struggles around the shelters. We are part of that soil within which the Poor People's Campaign, the new Poor People's Campaign, emerged. And so we defend the Poor People's Campaign. We know that at the very top of this society, they feel threatened by what we're doing here. There have been threats of violence, death threats against Reverend Barber, or I should say Bishop Barber. And I think that we take this very seriously. And so we have to defend and have to protect this growing movement that we organized in 40 states, Moral Fusion, Direct Action, and state capitals. We changed the narrative, began to change the narrative, for a very significant moment, and continued to do that. And so I think that I can just speak for myself as the lead of the lead organizer for the union, is that we're going to continue to contribute to and be very much a part of that campaign, and take very seriously the task we have before us. We can't afford to do anything else, in our view, if we're serious about what we're up against.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I appreciate you expanding on that question. I just want to kind of end with one more response, and then I'm going to turn it over to Anthony to close us out, just to be respectful of folks' time. There was a question from one of our sibling organizers in LA about what we're doing to take over vacant hotels and private property, and how we get public support around this. And I just want to say that we're absolutely fighting for these things. We've had a chapter in Rochester, New York, that has been able to obtain 3 floors of a hotel, and the union leaders are actually in that hotel. We've also had other places in California where this has been promised, but not followed through on. And the way that we gain and grow public support around this is we turn it into projects of survival. Concessions are just that, they're just concessions, and freedom isn't free. Anything concession that's given to us can absolutely be snatched back. So we're using these concessions as projects of survival, and growing public support through press, and getting out our own narrative through flyers and rallies and other things. So we're using all of this through the Poor Organizing the Poor model to hopefully highlight the conditions, highlight what's going on, highlight where the structures are failing around basic human rights of housing, food, healthcare, and using all of, whether it was a negative outcome where we didn't get the housing, or a positive outcome where we did, we're still weaponizing that. And we're still turning that into projects of survival, ways to use our press, ways to do political education of why concessions are just that, they're concessions, and co-optation as well. So I just wanted to raise that up. And I'm also going to give out my email address. Anyone that registers, hopefully we can give the email address. Once Anthony finishes with our closing, I can give that out and put it in the chats as well. But you can get in touch with me anytime. I'm sorry we could not get to everybody's questions. These are amazing questions. And hopefully we'll be able to do this again to thank Free Speech TV and Peter and Skylight for this amazing event. And I want to turn it over to you, Anthony, for your closing comments.
Okay, Kristen. Well, again, thanks so much, everyone, for giving us a chance to be part of this celebration of 30 years of Takeover. I want to say, though, if I could, to this question we got from LA, I tried to write type out an answer, but I'm technologically challenged. So these are questions that we need to have a discussion, and we're going to make arrangements, because those are the questions of housing and unhoused, and the differences, and how do we actually conduct a battle for these hotel rooms. These are very serious questions that we're gaining some real experience with on all sides. So I invite the questioner. Let's talk. I'll get in touch with Kristen, get in touch with us, and we'll share that experience. And we want to learn from you guys too. Reclaiming Our Homes is a very powerful movement out there in Los Angeles, where they've been able to take, I think, at least a dozen homes and move people into those homes during this COVID-19 crisis. So that I wanted to say that because I think there's some excellent questions that deserve full discussion, which we can't do tonight. In summing up, I think I saw a lot of old friends in that film. I saw a lot of leaders. You know, I saw people that I knew back then, and almost every one of them continues to fight today. And so you only heard from myself and Peter and Alicia, but we really do need to hear from them. Sherry Honkala and of course Savina and Keith McHenry and Maureen I saw from Detroit. You know, I hear some chatter there, but that's okay. We need Willie Baptist. You know, I mean, if we need to have more of these. It's time for us to have the frank discussions and exchange our experience and ideas as we move forward. Can we do this? Because I don't think we have the luxury of turning aside anyone who is serious about organizing poor and homeless people. So thanks, Peter, and thanks, Pamela. Thanks everyone who worked on that film. It's just let's go forward with it, and I look forward to the next gathering.
Yeah, so do I. So do I, Anthony. It's been a great evening. Thank you so much, everyone.
I have put Alicia, did you want to say a closing remark?
No, I just appreciate being included. Thank you for hearing a little bit of what's going on here in Santa Cruz, and thanks.
Thank you so much. I put my email in the chat. It's Kristen, K-R-I-S as in Sam, T-I-N, Coangelo, C-O-L-A-N-G-E-L as in Larry, O as in octopus, @gmail.com. I just want to shout out that I often get people saying they're emailing me frantically and I'm not getting it, and it's because they spell the Kristen with an E, which is the more common spelling. So it's Kristen with 2 I's, K-R-I-S-T-I-N, .coangelo@gmail.com. You can also get in touch with us through the hosts of this panel and this screening. Again, thank you to all the documentarians, all the organizers, all the panelists, everyone that joined us tonight. And we hope that we will connect again. Peace, love, and solidarity to all of you.
Good night.
Good night.
Goodbye.